So I want to take a moment and talk about why the Wilson cycle is so important and what it implies. Now remember, for this class, I want you to start thinking about things as processes. So if we start thinking about these tectonic events that we're going to talk about in terms of the Wilson cycle, that's definitely going to help you out a lot. So hopefully as you've looked through and as you've read, there are two phases to the Wilson cycle, the opening phase and the closing phase. Basically, what the Wilson cycle is the opening and closing of the ocean basins. And then, of course, what happens therein, right, is all a part of that process. So here, if we go to the beginning, right, we see early rifting. Right, this is where we have a continent that's going to break into two pieces. This is how we break up a continent. And that is the only way we have to break up a continent. Now, this is actually occurring to several continents today, but the best example is Africa. If you take a look at the Horn of Africa, it's actually breaking apart from the mainland of Africa. So that is a good example of early rifting. Now, as these pieces break up, right, what we're going to start to see now is as they break up, remember, at our divergent boundaries, as we talked about in Chapter 7, as this begins to crack, that asthenosphere is going to come in and fill in that gap. But it's not going to fill it in all the way to the surface. It's just going to fill it in a little bit. And we see that's going to create a low spot. And that low spot we call an ocean. Okay. So here in our opening phase, we're going to start to get a small ocean. And a good example of this is the Red Sea. If you take a look at the Red Sea, you'll see that it's a very narrow ocean basin between Africa and Saudi Arabia because they used to be connected together. They have currently split apart. And of course, this ocean is going to continue to get wider and wider, right? It's going to get very large, and a great example of that is the Atlantic. Now, we know, as we talked about in Chapter 7, that the ocean, the Earth, doesn't just continue to get larger forever. So if we're creating crust somewhere, we have to destroy it somewhere else. So this brings us to the closure of the ocean basin, and that's through subduction. So as we learned, right, as a continent hits another continent or an ocean hits an ocean, right, we're going to start to get subduction, right? Anytime we have an ocean plate involved, it's always going to subduct. So subduction closes our ocean basin. So a great example of what we see over here as the beginning of a subduction zone is going to be the Pacific. Right? The Pacific is slowly getting smaller, right? You may have heard of the ring of fire before as it's closing around all of the edges. Now eventually we're going to start to close the secondary plate here. Now you can see that we have a very narrow, small, skinny ocean, and a good example of this is the Mediterranean, right? So the Mediterranean is actually completely closing up. It's getting very narrow and very skinny, and eventually you're going to get a collision, right, between the two continents. And a great example of that today is the Himalayas. Now, I want to talk about this because we're really discussing the word orogeny. The word orogeny means mountain building. So, I want you to think of this as a process. So if I say mountain building, that means we have two continents that have collided. So if I say the word orogeny, that means all of this stuff had to have happened in order for those continents to collide. So when I say the word orogeny, I want you to think that that equals a full Wilson cycle. So in order to get an orogeny, we have to have the opening of an ocean basin and we have to see the closing of an ocean basin. So there's an immense amount of geologic history behind the word orogeny. So when you look at the Appalachian Mountains or the Himalayas or the Alps, any mountain range you can think of, right, if they have the word orogeny to them, if they are a mountain belt, all of this stuff has occurred before that. So wherever we see mountains, right, again the Himalayas, there used to be an ocean there. So I want you to start thinking about these things as processes. If you start thinking about them as processes, It's going to make your life a lot easier when we start talking about what we can predict or what we can see.